Y'all know I love Wigglytuff. It is my favorite vintage deck. So you know, if I'm able to start a new series of deck videos with Wigglytuff, I'm gonna do it. And Hidden Legends gave us a wonderful gift in reprinting Do the Wave Wigglytuff, this time as an EX. The playstyle is very similar to that Wigglytuff deck from Base Fossil, but with a brand new set of support cards. Instead of relying on all of those trainers that technically count as Pokemon like Mysterious Fossil or Clefairy Doll, or even the classic big bulky normal Pokemon like Chansey or Lickitung, you're actually relying more on your supporter cards to quickly get your go-to support Pokemon into play as fast as possible. Playstyle is a bit odd, but that makes it more adaptable in that you can take your time in setting up Wigglytuff, or you can speed your way through setup and just get a bunch of Pokemon in play and hit with Do the Wave as early as you need to. It really just depends on the matchup and how much time you want to allot yourself in getting that setup done. So let's go ahead and jump into the first part of our deck list, which is your Pokemon lineup. The very first Pokemon is going to be the Wigglytuff from Hidden Legends, and thankfully, baby Pokemon had changed. There's no longer a baby rule where you're having to flip a coin every time you attack into it. Instead, we got this very unique kind of take on them where Wigglytuff, along with a lot of other baby Pokemon, have this baby evolution Poke Power. So once during your turn, you can put the Pokemon that technically evolves from the baby Pokemon from your hand onto the baby Pokemon, and when you do, you remove all damage counters from that Pokemon. So in this case, if you have the Wigglytuff in your hand, you can use baby evolution to technically evolve into that Wigglytuff and remove all the special conditions and all of the damage counters. Wigglytuff also has an attack for one colorless energy called Set Song. Search your deck for a basic Pokemon and a basic energy card, show them to your opponent, and put them into your hand. This is really what you need to get Wigglytuff set up, a way to just get basic Pokemon into your hand. That way you can play them on your next turn, fill up your bench, make sure that Do the Wave is going to be dealing maximum damage. Now, Wigglytuff can evolve up into, and will evolve up into, Jigglypuff, also from Hidden Legends. There's not really anything special about Jigglypuff. The main thing I want to mention here is that Wigglytuff can use its Poke Power to evolve up into Jigglypuff, heal off that damage, get rid of any special conditions that are on there. Wigglytuff and Jigglypuff both have the same HP. So you may be thinking, what's the point of evolving from Iggly into Jiggly when maximum benefit's probably going to be healing off 10 or 20 damage? The reason you do that is you can use Wigglytuff's attack to help get set up. You get more basic Pokemon into your hand. You can use Set Song to get the Jigglypuff out of your deck. Jigglypuff, even though it will be evolving from Wigglytuff, is still a basic Pokemon. Because of that, once you use Wigglytuff's power to evolve into Jigglypuff, you can then rare candy from Jigglypuff into Wigglytuff on the same turn. This is a really weird way of going about getting this Wigglytuff EX into play, but that is the fastest method for it, and you get some benefit along the way, especially if you are using Wigglytuff's attack to help get set up. Once you get up into Wigglytuff, you're going to be doing the wave all over the place. Wigglytuff EX has a solid 100 HP. It is an EX Pokemon, and so you are giving your opponent an extra prize, but in this case, it's well worth it because of the damage output that Wigglytuff can do, especially this early in the game. So we'll move on to your support Pokemon, which is Wynot and a Wobbuffet. These are both from Sandstorm. Wynot has the same baby evolution Poke Power, where you can use this power to evolve up into Wobbuffet on your turn if you have the Wobbuffet in hand. But Wynot also has that supporting attack. For one Psychic Energy, search your deck for a basic Pokemon card or evolution card for each energy attached to Wynot. Generally, it's only going to be one, but the evolution card you're going to be searching for is Wigglytuff. Or if you just don't have the Wobbuffet in hand, you can also search for the Wobbuffet, but this is just going to be another solid start for you because it's going to be assisting in your setup. So on top of the 4-4-3 line of Wigglytuff EX, we're going to be going a 4-2 line of the Wobbuffet. The Wynot is just a much better setup start than Wigglytuff in a lot of cases, but the Wobbuffet is a little more niche in its use. As you can see, it's got a Poke Body effect, Safeguard, prevent all effects of attacks including damage, done to Wobbuffet by your opponent's Pokemon EX, so this is a no-brainer swap in whenever your matchup is another EX deck. You also get a solid attack for 3 energy, you're dealing 50 damage, and 10 of that's done to yourself, but that's a pretty small cost to be dealing 50 damage to your opponent if your opponent's not able to deal damage back to you. And you may be thinking that for a Do the Wave deck, this isn't a whole lot of Pokemon. It's kind of just enough to fill your bench, but you do want to save the room in the rest of your deck for your trainer and supporters. That way your setup is so much smoother. There's so many tools to use in this format just to get basic and evolution cards into hand and into play that this is more than enough. I didn't believe it myself until I started playtesting a little bit, and it works out. Like I was saying earlier, it's very similar in playstyle to that classic Wigglytuff deck, except that you're relying more on your supporters and your trainers to retrieve Pokemon rather than to just get a bunch of Pokemon into your hand through draw and slap them down onto your bench. For our trainer base, we get to use the insane amount of draw power available in this 2004 format, starting with Copycat from Expedition. This is a 2 of, just because it can be dependent on your opponent's hand size. Well, it's absolutely dependent on your opponent's hand size. In addition to that, we're going to have a full playset of Professor Oak's Research, which is just a straight up shuffle your hand into your deck, draw 5 cards. This is especially nice if Professor Oak's Research is the last card in your hand, because then it's just shuffle 0, draw 5. Steven's Advice, a card that seems like it was built for a Wigglytuff style deck. Draw a number of cards up to the number of your opponent's Pokemon in play. One of those cards that just kind of punishes your opponent for doing exactly what this deck is trying to do and just filling your bench. And in the EX era, most of the time the playing fields were full, and so Steven's Advice could take full advantage of that, which is why it's an easy addition to any EX deck, and you're going to see that as we get into more videos. 3 copies of Pokemon Fan Club, which are going to be extremely helpful for what Wigglytuff is shooting for. It's a straight up search your deck for 2 baby Pokemon and or basic Pokemon, allowing you to search out all of those Igglybuffs, Jigglypuffs, Wynots, Wobbuffets, anything in this deck except for Wigglytuff. You're going to be able to search 2 of them out with Pokemon Fan Club, get them straight onto your bench. That's going to boost Do the Wave. 3 copies of TV Reporter from EX Dragon. Draw 3 cards, then discard any 1 card from your hand. Just another great draw resource to have. That's going to be all the draw support. Then we're going to move into Ancient Technical Machine Rock. Like all other TM cards, this attaches to your Pokemon, giving it an additional attack that it can use, and then it gets discarded at the end of the turn. And this is where the wording and the card type kind of comes into play, because you're going to be attaching this to Wobbuffet. The Ancient Technical Machine cannot be attached to a Pokemon EX, so it's going to go on a Wobbuffet. And you might be saying, Wobbuffet's a basic Pokemon. Yes, it is, but it's what the TCG considers to be an evolved basic Pokemon if it's coming from a Wynaut. The same thing for a Jigglypuff. If you are just playing Jigglypuff straight from your hand, it is a basic Pokemon. But if you are using Igglybuff's Baby Evolution Pokepower to evolve into Jigglypuff, Jigglypuff then counts as an evolved basic. And that is where this little loophole comes into play for Ancient Technical Machine Rock, in that you can attach it to Wobbuffet as long as it is an evolved Pokemon. It doesn't have to be a Stage 1 or a Stage 2 Pokemon as long as it is evolved. So enough with the rulings explanation. What does this thing actually do? For 1 colorless energy, the Pokemon it's attached to can use the Stone Generator attack. If your opponent has any evolved Pokemon in play, remove the highest stage evolution card from each of them and put those cards back into his or her hand. Any evolved Pokemon your opponent has on their side of the field, it gets devolved. That's a pretty powerful tool to have for 1 colorless energy, especially when you're going to be dealing huge chunks of damage with Wigglytuff, and your opponent can switch those Pokemon back to the bench, get them safely onto the bench to avoid giving you those KOs. If you are able to move a Wobbuffet into the active position, attach Ancient Technical Machine Rock, and then use Stone Generator, you're going to devolve all of those evolved Pokemon that have these huge chunks of damage counters attached to them and get multiple knockouts. Now, it's not going to be super useful against all decks. This is pretty niche. This is for when you are playing against decks that focus on evolved Pokemon. A lot of the time, you're going to be playing against big basics, and this is not going to matter at all. But there's 2 copies in there for the matchups where it does matter. Next, we got 4 copies of Pokemon Reversal. This is just Gust of Wind with extra steps. It's worse Gust of Wind, yes, but it's still a very useful tool when the point of your deck is to get some decent donk hits every now and then, where you can gust out a low HP Pokemon, do the wave all over it, and take an easy prize. You also want to be moving your own Pokemon around. Like I was talking about earlier, if you get in a situation where maybe your Wigglytuff is up against an opposing Wobbuffet and can't deal damage to it, you want to be able to switch into Wobbuffet without really having to discard anything off of Wigglytuff to pay its retreat cost. Its retreat cost is only 1, but a lot of times a Wigglytuff in the active position is going to have 0 energy on it. More on that in a second. It's probably pretty obvious with this boost energy sitting over here in the deck list, but we'll come back to it. Got Rare Candy, 2 copies of Rare Candy from what I was talking about earlier in the video, where this will allow you to get Wigglytuff into play just 1 turn faster, which in a game of Pokemon, especially in the EX era where everything is very fast paced from the get-go, Rare Candy is a huge part of this format because it can get bigger Pokemon into play faster, and that's exactly what you're going to be doing here. Like I said, Igglybuff into Wigglytuff using Igglybuff's Baby Evolution power, and then from Jigglypuff into Wigglytuff using Rare Candy. Now, because you're going to be maxing out damage with Wigglytuff here at 80 damage, because you get 5 Pokemon on your bench, that's dealing an additional 50 damage on top of the base 30. 80 damage is a lot to be dealing to your opponent's Pokemon, but say they have 90 HP. Well, it's a good thing you got 3 copies of Strength Charm from Expedition in here. You attach Strength Charm, you're dealing an extra 10 damage until the end of that turn. Once the turn's over, you're discarding Strength Charm. Much like Pokemon Reversal, Strength Charm is just a worse plus power because you can only attach 1 tool at a time. You can't stack 3 Strength Charms onto a Wigglytuff to deal 30 extra damage. It's only going to deal that extra 10, but in a surprising amount of cases, that is all that you need. Final card we're going to be looking at in the trainer base here is Town Volunteers, which is crucial for getting those Wigglytuffs back after they've been knocked out. Town Volunteers is an even bigger card for Wigglytuff, considering that you only run 17 Pokemon in the deck. You're going to need a way to get those Pokemon back if they are knocked out. Not so much on the basic energy, just because it's not a huge part of this deck, but that's a pretty decent segue over to your energy, where you see 4 Boost Energy. Boost Energy provides 3 colorless energy as long as it's attached to an evolved Pokemon, and at the end of your turn, after you've attached the Boost Energy, you discard it. So it is a 1 turn, 3 energy boost, but that's all you need for Wigglytuff. You can go straight from Igglybuff to Jigglypuff, Rare Candy to Wigglytuff, attach the Boost Energy, and with the right setup, you're dealing 80 damage as early as turn 2. That's powerful. That's on brand for Do the Wave. And then on top of that, you just have your 9 Psychic Energy so that you can adequately power up a Wobbuffet if you really need to. But generally what you're looking at is a starting game with a Wynot or an Igglybuff. You are going to have plenty of situations where you have to start with a Jigglypuff too. That's fine. You're looking at attaching 1 energy to one of your babies for your first attack, because that attack's going to help you get a setup unless you just have the perfect starting hand. But Wynot is really the Pokemon you're looking to start with, just because it does have that option to search for a basic or an evolution card, meaning that you're going to be able to search out at least Igglybuff and Wigglytuff, and the rest of this draw power is going to get you where you need to be for the rest of the game. The setup here is very simple, and that's one of the reasons I love any type of Do the Wave deck, whether it's the Jungle Wigglytuff or this one, is because really all you got to do is get Wigglytuff into play, and your trainer support does the rest for you. Wobbuffet is a nice partner for Wiggly because it does help deal with opposing EX Pokemon while also covering Wigglytuff's weakness with Flip Over without actually hitting itself for weakness on that 10 damage recoil. That's why I used it in this video as an example of the most simplified version of this deck. If you don't want to use Wobbuffet, well, what other options are there? That's another beautiful aspect of Wigglytuff, is that it's a colorless attacker. You can pair it with whatever you want. You can build whatever bullshit potpourri style deck you want. You want to mix in Mewtwo as an alternate heavy attacker? Go for it, bubby. Firestarter Wigglytuff? Sure. A stall version of Wiggly? Go for it. There's not really a definitive Wigglytuff deck for 2004 because you could slot it into any deck as just a 2-2 line and it would function the same way. It may dilute the original purpose of any deck that you slot it into, which is why for the sake of this video I chose to build a Wigglytuff centric deck. But that doesn't mean you can't partner it with whatever your other favorite Pokemon are because, as mentioned earlier, it's a colorless attacker. But that's enough Wiggly talk for the day. Let me know what you thought about the deck down in the comments section. Let me know what decks you want to see in the future, and let me know what specific cards you want to give the spotlight while we are in this golden age of the TCG. There is so much more content coming to the channel soon, so please stay tuned. Your likes, comments, and subscribe clicks really do go a long way, as well as all the feedback I get here on the channel. I appreciate all of you viewers so much. I will see you next video.